Recently, this report on the EU came out and it outlined how the EU is falling behind and that if nothing changes, it will lose its position as a global economic powerhouse. The report was written by Mario Draghi, an economist who previously was the president of the European Central Bank and Italy's former prime minister, and who is often credited with saving the euro during the Eurozone crisis. This time, Draghi is sounding the alarm on the EU's future, and understandably, it got a lot of attention. But what do these 400 pages actually say? Why is the EU falling behind? And the biggest question of all, can it be saved? Let me explain. Despite it sounding like the report is complex and difficult to decipher, it can actually be simplified into three main problems. The first major problem is the productivity gap. The report compares productivity of the EU to global competitors like the US and China, and the picture isn't pretty. To be clear, productivity in economics is the efficiency of the production of goods and services, so essentially the ratio between the input and output of an economy. The more output that can be obtained from one unit of input, the more efficient the system is, so the more productive it is. To give you an idea of the situation, the EU has been experiencing a growth in labor productivity by around 1% per year between 1995 and 2019, which sounds good but pales in comparison with the US's increase of 2.1% per year in that same period. So why is this a big deal? Draghi's report makes a startling prediction. If the EU maintains its current productivity growth rate, the EU's GDP won't increase. It will just stay constant until 2050. But how is that possible if productivity is still increasing? The answer lies in something that's hard to avoid for the EU: a shrinking working population. According to the report, by 2040, the workforce is projected to shrink by close to 2 million workers each year. Fewer workers means less overall output and less productivity can be ramped up significantly. This means the EU will have to lean more on productivity to drive growth. In other words, the current pace won't cut it. The EU needs to find a way to get more output from fewer people. So how does Draghi propose they increase productivity and close this productivity gap? Well, he highlighted a massive difference between the EU's and US's economy, namely the tech sector. When you look at the tech sectors of each economy, there's a big gap, and this lag in technology greatly affects the EU's overall productivity. With tech, labor is much more impactful. Where 1 hour of work in a factory impacts what is manufactured in that hour, an hour of work on, for example, software can impact every copy of that software, so there's a much higher leverage on labor in tech. From Silicon Valley's AI innovations to breakthroughs in automation, tech makes it possible to do more with less. And the issue is that the same level of innovation in tech just isn't happening in Europe. Out of the world's top 50 tech companies by market cap, only 4 are from the EU. The US has 34. The report breaks it down further. EU companies tend to specialize in what are called mature technologies. These are industries that have been around for a while, like automotive or traditional manufacturing, where groundbreaking innovations are less frequent. As a result, less money is being poured into research and innovation. To be specific, in 2021, that number was 270 billion euros less than the US. And when you look at the top companies leading R&D investment in Europe, the top 3 are all automotive giants. Compare that to the US, where tech companies dominate the list, and it's clear to see why the EU is falling behind. But it gets even more concerning. The report points out that no EU company that was founded in the last 50 years has reached a valuation of over 100 billion euros. Meanwhile, in the US, all 6 companies valued at over $1 trillion were founded in the last 50 years. This signals a serious issue with scaling and competitiveness in the European tech scene. Now, with the AI revolution already underway, the stakes are higher than ever. Draghi warns that if the EU doesn't address this issue now, it risks missing out on a massive opportunity. And missing out isn't just about losing a few tech companies, it's about being left behind in the global economy. So why is the EU struggling so much with tech? The report identifies several barriers. For one, the regulatory environment in Europe is often inconsistent and restrictive, making it harder for startups to thrive. Moreover, many European entrepreneurs are choosing to seek funding from US venture capitalists and move their operations across the Atlantic. In fact, between 2008 and 2021, nearly 30% of European-founded unicorn startups valued over $1 billion relocated their headquarters abroad, mostly to the US. And even for those that stay, the heavy regulatory burdens can be a killer. More than half of small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe say that administrative red tape is their biggest challenge. These hurdles are especially tough on digital sector companies, where speed and agility are key to staying competitive in their ever-changing environment. Finally, another major issue for the tech sector mentioned is the lack of coordinated policies across the EU that drive investments in innovation. Draghi emphasizes that investing in breakthrough technologies requires substantial capital, which could be more efficiently mobilized if EU member states aligned their economic policies. Unlike the US and China, where fiscal policies, trade regulations, and foreign economic strategies work together to encourage investment, the EU's policy framework is fragmented. It takes an average of 19 months for the EU to agree on new laws and legislation, and that's before those laws are even put into practice across all member states, which ultimately slows down the ability to attract investment and foster innovation. So, what's the solution? Other than improving the laws and legislation of countries to encourage these faster-moving tech companies, Draghi suggests that Europe needs to focus on giving its citizens the skills they need to thrive in a tech-driven future. This means investing in education and job training to ensure that technology and social inclusion go hand in hand. While the EU should aim to match the US in innovation, it should strive to exceed it in creating opportunities for all its citizens. Now that we've explored the productivity gap, the other two issues focus on commitments the EU has made in their fundamental values, one of them being a sustainable environment and the issue of decarbonization. Europe has long been a leader in clean technology, boasting advancements in wind turbines, low-carbon fuels, and other green innovations. But, as Draghi highlights, this leadership is being tested by growing competition from China. Here's the dilemma. While China offers the potential for cheaper and more efficient routes to meet the EU's decarbonization goals, relying too heavily on Chinese imports could undermine Europe's own clean tech industries. This creates a trade-off between achieving sustainability targets quickly and preserving Europe's industrial base in the long term. The report warns that without a coordinated strategy, Europe risks losing its competitive edge in this crucial sector. So, what's the solution? A strategy comprised of 4 different approaches for different industries. For industries where Europe can't compete on cost, the plan suggests importing technologies while diversifying suppliers to limit dependency. In sectors where job protection is vital, Europe should welcome foreign investment but use trade measures to counteract unfair advantages from foreign subsidies. For strategic industries critical to Europe's security, the focus is on boosting local production and fostering joint ventures to retain technological know-how. Lastly, for emerging technologies with high growth potential, protective measures should help them scale before facing global competition. This mixed approach aims to lower energy costs, lead in clean tech, and ensure Europe stays competitive and secure. And talking about being secure, the final major issue Draghi's report addresses is security, a fundamental prerequisite for economic stability and growth. Europe is particularly vulnerable due to its heavy reliance on external suppliers for critical resources and technology. For instance, 75 to 90% of global semiconductor production is concentrated in Asia, leaving Europe exposed to supply chain disruptions. Moreover, while the EU is the second largest military spender globally, this is not reflected in the actual strength and cohesion of its military forces. The reason? Fragmentation. Europe's defense industry is too divided, with multiple countries operating different types of equipment, which hinders interoperability and weakens collective defense capabilities. To illustrate, Europe uses 12 different types of tanks, compared to just 1 in the US. What makes this even more concerning is that a significant portion of Europe's military spending goes to non-EU suppliers, with the US being the primary beneficiary. This not only weakens Europe's defense industry, but also increases dependence on external powers. To address these challenges, Draghi calls for a genuine and coordinated EU foreign economic policy to strengthen Europe's supply chains and boost its defense capacity. This involves creating industrial partnerships, securing critical resources, and fostering a more unified and competitive defense sector within the EU. So we have the solutions to the issues, but here comes a very important question. How can the EU afford these solutions? The report makes it clear. This will require a significant annual investment, specifically around 5 percentage points of the EU's GDP every year. 5% might not sound like much, but when you compare the number with the GDPs of whole countries, the figure becomes quite unbelievable. To be clear, 5% of the EU's GDP in 2023 is around 800 billion euros. Out of the 27 countries that are members of the EU, only 5 countries have a GDP higher than this number. And remember, this is an annual investment. The report is essentially saying, for these solutions to be implemented, the EU needs to raise and allocate the entire economic output of Poland, its 6th largest economy by GDP, plus another 50 billion euros on top of that every year. It's an immense amount of money, and naturally, critics have mentioned this as one of the reasons they questioned this report. Critics have questioned the feasibility of this level of investment, especially since around 80% of it is expected to come from the private sector. Some critics, like economist Daniel Gross, also argues that the report falls short in discussing the details of the budget and how it will be spent. He states that the overall figure is poorly documented, with just one short table, relegated to page 282. Moreover, he mentions that the report calls to spend 300 billion euros on digital tech and innovation, yet aside from suggesting a doubling of the European Research Council funds, which would only account for 3 billion euros, there's little indication of how exactly the remaining 297 billion euros will be spent. Adding to the skepticism, another economist by the name of Yanis Varoufakis pointed out that the main problem is not the lack of details of the budget, but how to even obtain it. Over 5 years ago, just like Draghi did now, Varoufakis had suggested a new Green Deal to save Europe from economic stagnation, also estimating up to 5% of Europe's income for investment in green energy and sustainable technologies. He also came up with a way to raise the funds, but according to Varoufakis, the EU is too late to adopt the same fundraising approach now. Other than comments about the budget and financing, there is also criticism regarding the report's inclusiveness. Not a single Central and Eastern European personality has been questioned by Draghi's team about the desolate state of Europe. Similarly, NGOs and civil society organizations, which play a crucial role in policy discussions, stated that their views are not reflected in the 400-page report. While the report tackles a massive problem and does highlight the stagnation of the EU, it is not comprehensive. The planning behind the budget and obtaining the funds need to be further discussed and clarified, and the report should aim to not leave out the perspectives of any parts of the EU. Will it work, or are we at the beginning of the big downfall? That remains to be seen. While this report has sparked an important conversation and pointed out crucial areas for change, actually making it happen is going to be much more difficult. The EU finds itself in a defining moment where the future of its economy hangs in the balance.